I thought this little cluster of foliage by the banks of a local creek was a great little scene to draw for a bit of foliage practice. We have both a few different types of foliage here, and we also have a nice sense of stepping back, of depth of plane within a relatively shallow area. So I was looking forward to getting this picture home and being able to draw it. And except for a little snake that was blocking my path out of this spot, and I had to eventually throw a stick at it to scare it away, it was a very pleasant time. So this took me just under 20 minutes to draw in real time. It took me 19 minutes. So you're watching this at time and a half. So if you'd like to see it at actual drawing speed, if you use that cog icon and slow the video down to half speed, that will be pretty much my actual speed. I'm using a 0.3 pen for this closest shrub. This strappy, reedy looking plant. These often provoke a lot of angst when we draw. The temptation is to be drawing every individual strap, leaf, whatever, from base to end and tip, and just get like a giant cluster of wires that have all been bound together at the base and allowed to fan out all around. But that's not really how it looks. And so we're trying to capture the feel of what we see. There's a problem that with this 0.3 pen that I'm using, it is probably a bit thick for this, but because it's the closest foliage to us, we do want it to stand out. And I don't want to labour the drawing of this because I want it to not look like it's too carefully done in relation to the rest of the scene. So these are all issues going through my head as I'm trying to find the marks to draw it. I'm also aware that I'm a little out of scale. I'm drawing this slightly too large for the size I'm going to draw what's behind, even though I will enlarge it a bit. But in the end, I'm thinking, well, you know, this particular part of the scene in my drawing just can look a bit closer to us than it does in the reference, that there's just a bit more of a gap between this clump of strappiness and the small trees behind. Another thing just to bear in mind is, although it looks like some of those trees are very much in super strong sunlight because of the colour of their leaves compared to some of the other leaves, that's actually the new growth. A lot of plants in Australia, the new growth is of a much lighter or even a totally different colour. Some gum trees have their new growth in reddy purples or even deep purples, but totally disappears to greens by the time they reach maturity, often from very, very bright new growth to quite dull actual colours when they're fully grown. So we're really seeing not so much the light as the colour of the new growth, which usually is oriented towards the major light direction, but it is worth bearing that in mind. So I'm still chugging along with this strappiness down here. Took a fair bit of time compared to the overall time. The rest of the drawing was very quick. So I think it's a particularly good demonstration for that, for a very fast capture, finding the marks that create foliage, but also, as I said, a sense of the stepping back of these canopy bunches that we have. I think how I draw the trunks, using that word lightly because they're not very large or thick, in a helpful way as well. So now I've left the strappiness to just get a sense of the marks and how they're going to look, because I think I'm probably better off establishing that, or at least part of that, before I try and progress and finish that bush in the front, because I'll have a better sense of how I want my marks for that to be when I see what this mid-ground effect is going to be, how the marks I put here are going to mount up. So I'm using a 0.2mm pen now, although it actually looks heavier because I was using the 0.3 very lightly trying to get thinner marks and create thinner shapes than I actually did. So I'm buzzing with all these thoughts in my head as I draw this. Please hit the like button if you think this is helpful, or if you hope it will be, or if you like the thumbnail drawing. That would be a big help for me. And if there's a hype button there, I would certainly appreciate you giving that a belt every now and then for me. So at this point, I'm working on the closest bunch of foliage and the next one back. I'm not trying to get too precise in terms of my reference. Canopies are nice and forgiving that way. It's part of what I think makes trees and foliage such a great subject to draw, because there's quite a bit of leeway to just go with the process without having to get strung out measuring angles and exactness. If we get these things wrong in a building, it looks not quite right. But because of the irregular shape of most trees, it really lets us pay a little more attention to some of the technique things. So you can see I'm doing the trunks. Notice I often come from top down, and this also lets me leave a little break in parts, which perhaps I'll draw something through, but it also just gives visually the option of thinking that there's something bright in front of the trunk there, perhaps a leaf or something such as that. Leaving little discontinuities in things that we draw in scenes like this is part of how we establish a sense of reality. Because when we have a scene as complex in life, we don't get sharp and continuous edges right up to a border. There are these transition periods where we're looking through or between little objects that we can't draw them all, and sometimes the shadows, the dark things behind, are the more obvious things. So we can suggest that by leaving little gaps and things. Now, I went too dark on that bit on the left. It's probably going to be the darkest value in the whole drawing, which is not a place where you want it. So I just point that out to let you know, firstly, that yes, I do make mistakes. I do not pay attention for 30 seconds. And suddenly I realized I've lost focus on the overall scene I'm drawing, and I've just concentrated on that little bit in isolation. And that's why I went too dark there, because I'd forgotten to be thinking, now, overall, where do I want the darkest values to be? I want the darkest values to be in that bush in the front, that big strappy thing, clumping bush in the front, because that's where the darkest values are in the reference, pretty much, but it's also the closest of the darkest values. So I'm going to certainly make it the darkest values to have it feel forward. And so I've confused that a bit by having a similarly dark value further back and off to the side. The only good thing about it is that it is at one of the extremities of the drawing, so it's not going to jump at us straight away. Now, it's interesting when I'm drawing this, by now I'm working out what I should have done. By now I'm working out, well, if I were doing this again, I would make sure I would, and this is a very helpful process to leave a bit of room in your head for. I would be, if we look at this clumping shrub here, and we take all of that lighter green on top, I'd be trying to leave that as almost a white shape, much the way I do with smaller grasses. I've just got too many lines there, and I've got too many lines there now, and I can't remove them. So the best I can do is to make a mental note, go slower with the top, and leave almost a crescent of shaggily outlined white paper, if all of that makes sense. So insight into a helpful way of thinking when things aren't quite right. I often say our mistakes are our friends because they direct us for our next drawing. And mistakes aren't just lines that go too far or aren't at the right angle. Mistakes are anything that after we've put them on the paper, we think that's not ideal. And obviously, if I'd realised that at the time, I wouldn't have done it. So a lot of mistakes we only come to realise through experience. We have to make them to understand them and learn from them and then stop making them. The important thing, though, is that we do look and critique and learn from them. And maybe I might draw all of this scene at some future stage and try and do something with the creek as well and the water reflections, which, as you know, is not a overly familiar subject for me, and even capture something of all that background foliage, so push it further. So this may end up just being a study for a more involved scene. And in that case, I will certainly pay attention to the top of this clumping bush here. And now I'm doing the furthest foliage here, and so it's still not that far away, but it's further away than the closer parts. And because this is as far back as I'm going to go, these will be my lightest marks and my lightest values. The photo brings everything closer together, and that has a flattening effect, but I want to put a sense of 3 dimensions back in it, push this foliage back further to create more of a sense of reality, and also to separate the canopies that come from different parts of this small tree, which does branch out in different ways. So I'm using my 0.1 still, I think, yes, which I used for this furthest part, and I just haven't put it down, but I am consciously drawing a little bit slower and a little more heavily to put more ink on the paper using it now than when I did for that furthest part. And I'm trying to work out what can I do with the top of the clump, but there's not much I can do at that point. So a little more suggestion here just of the continuing riverbank of things very far behind, but only barely outlined in a very tentative way to give a sense of something beyond a little lower down as well. And we're getting pretty close to being done. Please hit that like button for me. This reference photo, of course, will be on my community page. There'll be a link in the description that will take you to it. Why not have a go drawing the scene, or perhaps just the clumping bush, or perhaps just the canopy, or perhaps the whole thing, or perhaps the reflections. Have a go at drawing some part of this foliage and strengthen your foliage drawing skills, particularly different types of foliage and foliage stretching back into different directions. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Well, a lovely little walk down into a sunny gorge and a great exercise for foliage. I've certainly learnt some things. I hope you have too from watching and listening, and I hope you do also from having a go drawing this yourself. But whatever you do, whatever you draw, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.